Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw. I'm here with John Green, who is the founder and managing director of JG Collection, which is a group of luxury hotels, many in Europe, but also around the rest of the world. And we've talked to John before, actually right after the Virtuoso conference meeting, Virtuoso Travel Week last year. And we wanted to get his take on what's going on with his hotel group during this crisis. Because he does have hotels in a lot of different places around the world and what he's hearing. And we're going to find out about all that and more on Insider Travel Report. John, first of all, just explain again what JG Collection is, how you select your hotels, what you look for, and why those hotels join your group.
Great. Well, first and foremost, morning, James. From sunny London. It's a pleasure being on.
That looks like sunny Scotland to me behind you.
We've got sunny Scotland in the background, but I'm sitting here in southwest London, in sunny southwest London, and want to give you a shout out to you first and foremost, James, before we go on. The work you're doing at this time, the platform you're giving a lot of people like myself. I saw Andrea on there from ICU Bellagio. You should be applauded for it. We like the content. Keep it coming.
Well, we will definitely do that. We got nothing else to do. We're just sitting at home, you know?
I get it. So a little bit about me, and as if some of the viewers may not have heard from our previous time, JG Collection. In effect, I've always said we're a bit of a business development family for independent hotels around the globe. We strive to move that towards more of a community so we can share best practice. And as ever, there was a time where the community is key is now, and I'm doing a lot of that with my hotels at the moment, just talking to them, finding out what's going on one side of Europe and versus over your side in the US. So I think part of the value of the proposition of what we do in business development is to hopefully supply information, but also I think we're the objective really is for us to provide our hotels with a serious amount of ROI on what we do in the B2B community. So we're out there. Some of the hotels have been with us for a very long period of time. You'll see Inverlochy behind me there. That was a hotel I got married in, myself, James. So I know every single hotel in that property, believe you me. We formed a management company in there, and actually we are a part owner, I suppose, in a management company that we set up now in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines on the island of Bequia, where we have the liming and the plantation. So, we've just come out of the season there as well. So, there's a bit of selection, I think, from clients, what they're looking for, what we're looking for. And you want to bring those together. You've got to look at the value system for hotels, our value system. We look for honesty, integrity, and transparency as well in any partnership. We're hardworking, but we think we've got a very, very, very strong network here in the UK, which a lot of our hotels look to. And it's a question of getting out there in partnership and projecting that brand, that hotel's identity into the marketplace, but finding them business at the same time. So we're a band of hardworking people here in the UK. James.
No, it sounds absolutely, and I'm glad you're there to support them. Are there any of your hotels that are open at this time?
As far as open are concerned, we have Hendricks in New York, Midtown. You'll know that property well.
Yes, we have stayed there. It's wonderful.
Yeah, you met Pablo, I think, who's the current GM down at Hotel Hugo. It's part of the Fortuna empire. They have 4, all beginning with H. And Hendricks, in its midtown position, has stayed there for, we're calling them key workers here in the UK, and you'll see some of those stories in the press. So they've remained doors open for the key workers, which, you have to take your hats off, not just to the key workers, but clearly to those hotels that are doing such a great job in these times. And we hear about them, cooking, providing food, providing meals, and not just the key workers, James. I think there's a legitimate argument that the hotels have to look at, the homeless situation at this time, and a number have jumped to the cause. And, that's a good news story as far as I'm concerned for my industry, and I'm quite proud to hear about them.
No, absolutely. So basically the Hendricks and trying to support maybe the medical workers and key personnel. But beyond that, a lot of your hotels are more leisure oriented, and they are probably at this point shuttered. Is there any projected opening date, or I mean, everything gets pushed back, but it is going to be in line with what countries and states and cities, say they need to be done. So, but is there any idea of when some of these things will open?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and this is very much the narrative at the moment. We're all looking to our governments. You heard from Andrea recently about Italy, where we have my good friend and your friend as well, Claudio Deli, there at Why the Best Hotels. There was the first European country to be hit substantially by the virus, and then it spread into other destinations in Europe. It unfortunately hit very hard, but remaining very optimistic. And our Italian friends are a very emotional group of individuals, including the staff that we have there in Florence and Venice, and soon to be Rome, where they were opening a hotel which was planned for this year. James, I think it's probably going to be set back a little bit, but that I think that shows the true colors of the passion that goes into providing the experience that a lot of our travel advisors, particularly for North America, look for when they look to Europe at the end of the day. We want everybody to bounce back out of this. I think it's going to take a concerted effort. At the moment, none of them are open. I think today, as I think Andrea reminded us, is you can pop into the gelato and pick up an ice cream there. You're able to pick up your coffee. I heard in Germany today, James, you and I can go and you're probably in a better position. You and I can go and get our hair cut.
That's something I'm really missing right now, and we don't know exactly when that's going to happen here in the States. Very few states have opened up hairdressers, and I know some people who are ready for hairdressers and nail salons seem to be two of the key services that people are really missing at this time. And I'm already looking at my hair and saying, at what point when I'm going to ask my friend to give me a little trim, but we'll have to see. Maybe I'll grow it back. I used to have it pretty long back in college days.
Hey, James, you're in a better position than I am, even against this backdrop. I think, I think generally speaking, what we'll see is, we'll possibly be as an industry at the back of the line. Any industry that's promoting the gathering of people is going to have difficulties initially in being the first in line. And I think, all I can do is refer to what we're doing here in the UK. So, Cobra Sit on Thursday, there was going to be an announcement Thursday. I think this is going to be the week where we're going to set the timetable by which we come out of the transition period. We're 2 weeks behind Italy, couple of weeks behind Spain as well. Sunday is the day that we think the announcement is going to be made. It's going to be it's going to be very, very, very interesting to see what that transition is going to look like. There's a lot of posturing politically and from the workplace to get the economy moving in every country. And there's a certain amount of hesitation about how that's going to operate. Schools going back, then hospitality coming back in as well, which is why I think, our government, and I heard some of the comments from some of the other interviews, I think it's been generally very good in terms of the support that it's given, the furlough system. I've certainly, as a company, taken advantage of it. I'd prefer to have them working within a furlough system, very much like the Dutch have done, paid their way through this. But, that's not my decision. It's above my pay grade, as they say, James. But, getting industry and the economy moving, when we're facing a pandemic is a very, very difficult position. I wouldn't want to be a prime minister at this.
Yeah, well, no one has ever encountered a situation like this. It's been probably the worst disaster to hit the world and definitely the travel industry in my lifetime and maybe forever, except maybe a world war. And even there, in the United States, people went about their daily lives and hotels were open, and this is something entirely new, different, and there's a lot of fear out there too. I think that people are very worried. But I thought once you're, we've switched the background now. Now there you go.
I thought I'd take you to Spain.
That's perfect. Yeah. Now we go from the Scottish, out in the Highlands to to
You're in,
spend.
you're in Girona at Hotel Camarol here.
There you go. That's perfect.
The gift that keeps giving, James.
Yeah, there you go. Well, who needs to travel, right? But no, I actually thought that when Boris Johnson, your prime minister, had his baby, that maybe he'd open up the country at that point. But in celebration, kind of a royal celebration. But then again, they didn't even do that for the Queen this year, right? So,
no, they didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now, what are you doing specifically? Obviously, you're serving as a communications vehicle with your members, with your hotel members. How are you? What are you telling them and working with them about this? Are you talking about new ways of approaching guests given the COVID-19? A lot of U.S. hotels are putting in new cleaning standards, and not to say they weren't great before, but now it's another level. I don't know if that's something that you're communicating or other things to these properties that are part of your collection.
Yeah, look, I think there's generally a lot. I think we're universally, in fact, it actually came out from an organization I've followed very carefully over there in the US, James, and Stuart and his team at Fuel they put a first survey out for about 10,000 travelers out of the US. What was the number one feature that they were looking for? And there were various replies, but over 60%, which is probably recognized as a number over here, we're looking at is the first thing people are looking at is safety.
Right.
So communicating that message. One of our Parisian hotel, funnily enough, Mob, which you may recount when I mentioned it to you, is kind of it's come out of Mama Shelter, the Surreal and Edward Farrock out of Standard Hotels. They're looking at May the 15th, and I've just been looking at some of their video outtake from Surreal himself going into the guest room and providing the narrative about what hotels have done. We look to our associations. It's a great housekeeping association here in the UK. Good ex-housekeeper of mine by the name of Liana Sparks sat on that for a very long period of time. So there's ways in which we communicate. And I think the challenge as well in communication, James, at the moment is the tone and the presentation of that communication. I think a number of hotels are stepping back from the selling element of that. I think it's important to get the narrative around safety very clear in people's minds, so people know what to expect. We love to paint pictures of travel, and we love to paint pictures of experience at the moment. But as you said, we've been through an unprecedented period. So a little bit of a reset, step back and think, well, what would my consumer, what would my traveler, what would my third party, what do my travel industry friends want to know at this part? And that's part and parcel of the work we've been doing, is talking to that. You'll know we look after leisure travel. It's an important segment for all our collections, but we're also dealing with meeting planners, we're dealing with corporate travelers, we're dealing with the weddings market, you're dealing with fine dining. All these segments that make up our great business of hotel keeping need to be considered. And I think what most hotels are doing at this time, James, is they're taking a step back and having a look at their business and thinking, okay, well, how can we reconfigure this to fit the transition that we need to make into what is possibly going to be the new normal.
Right. No, absolutely. Now, what the other side of this, of course, is how is JG Collection connecting with your members, with the travel agency community at this time, and how can you help travel advisors emerge from this and get them booking again the hotels in your collection?
Yeah, and again, sensing the message and making sure that tone is right. I think pretty much like everybody, and probably you, James, I have seen so many Zoom screens, so many panels, so many forums, so many interviews. Too much information is out there, I think, generally right. Speaking. We could go absolutely stark raving mad by listening to it, and it's fluid. And the key to it is because it's changing so often, so are circumstances. So it's probably in our best interest as an organization when we're communicating. And those lessons we've learned, I mean, I think I've used this period, I think, to explain to people in my industry that this is the time that you fix the holes in your bucket. You know, we're all busy. We can all be very busy in the jobs that we do, but this has been a tremendous opportunity to sit back and think, well, how can we reset and pivot, but also how can we do things differently? And that's certainly been the case in some of the communications. We know what we're on at the moment, this Zoom platform is probably going to be a narrative and probably a communication tool that we're going to have to take with us. If you think about the sales structure in companies like myself, and on a grander scale, if you're looking at leading hotels and small luxury hotels, how keen are people, agencies, MICE agencies, wedding planners going to be to see us in person? It's probably going to take some time for that to happen. So technology will play a really big part of that. And it's getting things like this, communicating with them, doing recordings, getting on people's websites. There's been a lot of great initiatives coming out of the Virtuoso family in the US. And all the other agencies, MICE agencies, wedding planners, where you can sit within the forums and communicate about your properties, the condition that they're in, what they're looking at on the other side of this, and how they will reopen in a staggered approach, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we're going to have to be guided by the science on this, James. And that's the trouble, because we have to sit back and see what a wedding will look like, what a dining room will look like, what a guest experience will look like. And I've got a lot of members, particularly in the luxury side of the business. And this, we can look at restaurants at the same time, particularly in London. You've got small staircases going down, so you've got small kitchens, James. The money that you have to spend on rent in these places is ridiculous, and none of that income is coming through at the moment. So how are you going to get a chef or a brigade, if you're cooking Michelin star food, into a very close area to be able to make that experience? The same way with hotels, and it's keeping that technology in check, while still, I think, and I personally believe, offering a hospitality experience. Because if it's going to look like a hospital ward, James, I know you and me wouldn't want to be in there.
No.
And we've heard stories about how that may look. I think what we initially have to do is look after our residents as hotels, then figure out how we can extend those services to our geographic area. We need to have a look at each of these segments and make sure that message is delivered.
Yeah, no, and in fact, you've sort of begun answering my next to last question was, how hospitality will change in the future, and what will be different, maybe it won't, if we obviously come up with a vaccine and ways to cure this particular crisis. That said, a pandemic, I should say. That said, there may be another one come down the pike at some point. But so maybe some of the standards that we have developed during this time will be something that we need to look at going forward forever.
Yeah, I think that question far more than some of the others, James, because I think a lot of the companies and a lot of people in our industry are thinking about what that future might be and waiting for that government. I think, interestingly enough, if you sit back and you look to the last pandemic, which was SARS, I hadn't realized, and I didn't even know don't know if you did, James, that SARS has never been cured. We have never found an antidote.
That's correct. I just read that the other day, and I remembered that there was really no vaccine developed, and in some of the cases now, vaccine developments being applied to COVID-19. It dates from SARS research that was never really completed and never really came up with a vaccine, which is rather alarming, unfortunately, because we're all sitting here saying, well, they'll develop a vaccine next year, just like they do flu, but this is a different animal, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's been. I mean, look, hey, we'd all like to be the owner of Microsoft. I mean, and Mr. Gates, I think, to his credit, saw this coming some time ago. But hindsight's a great thing, and the challenge we have, and particularly in the narrative in Question Time, with our Prime Minister here, is a lot of the journalists tend to want to focus on historic elements of how we've got into this mess. And it's like, well, actually, let's focus on the future. Let's all realize where we are at the moment and try to look at a way forward. It was shocking to me that was the case, and I didn't realize it myself. And I looked that up. So we're playing with information that we're getting from scientists and being passed down to us from government. So the way I see this going forward is, there's a short term and there's a long term, and the short term must be to have a look at a business in isolation, like hospitality, and look how that will work. Unfortunately, it's not going to work for everybody. I think that's the plain truth of it at the end of the day. If you look at the numbers that you need to generate, if you look at where produce will come from, if you look at our industry, our staff at the end of the day, they're all on furlough. We want to all bring them back. The business levels aren't going to be at the same, which is why there's a big cry out here as to how we can stagger that furlough system, and maybe it mirrors picking up business and getting the economy generally going. But there isn't. I don't think there's ever enough money in the world that can keep that going and keep us going at that pace for so long. I mean, if you look at our industry, it's 247 million people. It's the size of Brazil.
Right.
It's 1 in 11 jobs. It's a major contributor to GDP around the world as well. Governments will listen to that, but they'll also listen to the aerospace business. They'll listen to the airline. And inevitably, we have to get people on planes. I think we all know that there is going to be a demand, hopefully domestically, initially before the international traveler comes. So in answer possibly to the question previously, at this time, it's, data is key. You have to hold on to that data that you've had. You need to clean it. You need to be communicating the right message to encourage people back through the door. I think that's enormously important. But look at the issues of liability, James, and insurance, and it came up in our news this morning in the UK. We have to have a look at how we can move forward as an industry with the insurance companies and have a look at liability. And that's for the safety, as much for the guests, but as important to me is the staff within our industry as well. We
Absolutely.
need to protect them, and we need to make sure that we're looking after that. And I think possibly the biggest thing I want to see, and I think the biggest thing we can do is the language we're using. I've always been very optimistic. I continue to be so, but that optimism and that positiveness that we need to generate has to come from our media. But I think at the same time, we have to douse ourselves in somewhat a potion of reality to this as well, and therefore balance that out, because this industry has been through a lot in its time. It's facing the biggest transition that it will face, and it will take everybody to come together, and that's the biggest thing here. We are all in this together. We all need now to work together to get ourselves out of it, and it needs to be positive.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. Now, are there any other messages you want to get out to our travel advisors? We have about 100,000 of them that potentially can watch this, and I know they're eager to hear your words of wisdom and your perspective. We've been doing these. We started these Zoom interviews a few weeks ago, and they've been a great way to communicate across the industry and also to see what other people are, how they're dealing with the crisis in their way, because we tend to be a little insulated, if you didn't know, here in the United States. We don't go beyond our states and our federal government, and we occasionally will get reports of what's going on in China or Europe or whatever, but we don't have that kind of perspective anymore, especially what our media shows us. So anything else you want to get out to our travel advisors?
But it's interesting, James. You may not know this. I was in China in January. So I was in Shanghai and Beijing. I met with Tai, who's the new representative for Virtuoso. They just appointed him in the role there. Met with Jill from Small Luxury Hotel, and I met in an industry that I felt in, and this is both Traveler Made and Virtuoso, was very much in its infancy. And they're going to be hit badly from this, but forget politics, which I tend to do when I look at my friends in travel. I think everybody works hard and honestly in this business to make the money that they do, and that they need their support. And I hear encouraging signs from a domestic point of view. I've got from our Ampersand and our Vintry and Mercer partners here in London, a general manager that sits out there in Beijing. He moved his entire family there in November. They've just come through their holiday, their Labor Day weekend. If you went to Hong Kong, you probably would think nothing has actually happened. He's doing 75%, 100% occupancy in some areas out there. So I think there's got to be a level of hope and optimism for our industry,
right,
because it's our industry and our agents that we're dealing with, the Virtuoso family, the destination specialists that I'm speaking to on a daily basis, my Dream Escapes, my Celebrated, my Adams and Butler, my Noteworthies here in the UK. We have to spread that mood of optimism, and it has to travel with us. So what I'd say, the message is, hang in there. This industry has been through things, nothing like this before, but hang in there. People's desire to travel and experience travel will come again. When we're not sure how we get through it, we've said by working together enormously closely. The doors will be open. The hotels are there to support you and will show as much flexibility as they need to do. We need to get the airlines flying. We need to get our cruise ships back in the water. But it will happen. If anything, life has told us this will come back again. But, let's have a reset. Let's have a look at ourselves. We spent plenty of times with our family. Let's look at our workplaces. Let's fix those holes in the bucket. Let's get back to it. And let's do it differently.
Absolutely. Well, John, thank you for spending this time with us to talk about both your company and your perspective, because you do have global membership and you're hearing stories from around the world. And I know I've been on a few calls, Zoom calls like you, where we are getting that perspective. And we are fortunate to be in an industry that does go around the world. We have friends in places everywhere in the world. And that certainly helps and provides perspective to both travel suppliers and travel agencies in the future. But
one last thing, James.
Yes.
I've been using this all the time, and interesting enough, I keep telling people that rough seas make strong sailors. It's one of my favorite sayings, but actually in thinking about it, another one came to mind, which I think really is a little bit more apt. And I think we prefer the analogy where all boats rise when the waters come in. When your tide comes in, all boats rise, and that's what I want to see happen to this industry.
And that is a famous saying and really applicable to this situation. Again, John, thank you for taking the time, and best of health and safety to your whole family and to members of your collection, your hotel collection. Let's hope we all start to get back online. As you said, we're hearing about China coming back already. You have one hotel in New York that's bravely soldiering on to supply vital accommodations to the essential workers. So there's definitely some hope out there. We just have to keep soldiering on. And when you look back, I remember I was still traveling in February, and I was down in Mexico, and when everybody said, come home. And I didn't come home right away, I will admit it. I used the excuse that I couldn't get on an airline right away because it was full at that time. And when I finally did, there was nobody else on the plane, so I felt perfectly safe. But then I said, I'm getting out of here, and I really couldn't stay in New York. So now I'm down in Orlando sheltering. So and here things are sort of getting back to normal. So I wouldn't say, no, that's not the right word, but they opened up the outdoor restaurants today, and we'll see what else happens. And then the crucial hair salons and nail salons are still to come. But
those days will come, James. It's a new normal. We're all in this together. We'll get back.
Great. John, thanks again. And I'm James Shillinglaw, and this is Insider Travel Report.